Howdy folks, in today's episode we'll talk about street photography tips every photographer should know with, well, you find out right after this. Welcome to Camera Shake, where we bring you the insider scoop on all things photography and videography, giving you a unique opportunity to stay ahead of the curve. As always, I'm your host Kirsten Nuts, and before we get into it, I've got one thing to ask of you. I've noticed that over 65% of our viewers on YouTube and listeners on audio are not actually subscribed to this channel. I mean, come on people, you can really help me out by hitting that subscribe button. It'll help me get even more amazing guests on the show. It's just one click, that is all it takes. Thank you so much. Now, without further ado, let's give it up for today's special guest, the award-winning master of street photography, educator, author, and Fuji X-photographer, Valérie Jardin. Valérie, how's things?
Bonjour, very well, thank you. And well, master, I'm not quite sure, but I don't think anyone ever masters anything. Otherwise, why do it if you're already mastering it, right? So I wouldn't call myself a master, but yes, I'm an educator and I'm a passionate street photographer. And things are good. Just you catching me as I'm about to head back to Paris to teach the last two workshops of the season. So it's been a good year.
Well, I want to frame this episode around really about giving help to people who either maybe have dabbled in street photography but just don't feel that confident yet, or people who are thinking about it and are definitely not confident enough to actually just put themselves into that situation. Because I know I like a little bit of street photography; it's sort of almost like a pastime for me. But I do know how nervous I used to be, just going out in the street and taking pictures of random people. Right. Let's just give our viewers and listeners sort of a basic idea of what street photography actually is.
Well, it's basically documenting everyday life in public spaces. And I think there is often a misconception as to what street photography means. And a lot of people get really intimidated by it because they think it's being in people's face. And although that's one way to do it, would not be the way I would recommend you start off with, but it's not for everyone. But you can do it in so many more subtle ways and more appealing ways, I would say, because I don't know who wants the deer in the headlights type shot. I sure don't. I don't like that way of photographing life on the street. I don't like confrontational photographers who just think because they're in a public place they can pretty much have a go at everything and just even flash in people's face. I don't like that. And if somebody did that to me, I would definitely not like it. So I think you need, first of all, your style of photography, the way you approach everyday life is going to be very personal because it really is completely linked to your personality. And so if you want to start, you can certainly be a more minimalist street photographer and photograph people a little bit further away. I shoot everything at 23 millimeter, and I can get really close to people, but I'm definitely not in their face. And there's a big difference. And it's all about respect.
And it's a very fine line, because especially at that focal length, 23 mil, which I know from looking at your portfolio, and I really I've been following your Instagram account for a long time. I know you use a Fuji X series camera, or I should say Fuji X series cameras, to create your street photography. Which I am the proud owner of an X100V. I've loved that thing. For actually not the X100F, even a little bit older, but I love that thing. It's fantastic for street photography. But I also know that the 23 mil equivalent lens on that does require you to get really rather close. So how do you balance that sort of respect with getting somebody large in the frame?
Well, it depends on your approach. And yes, you have to learn to be invisible, because I get so close to people I could touch them. However, they don't really know I'm there. So you have to be discreet. I think the advantage of shooting, so it's a 35 equivalent, 23 on a crop sensor. And I've been shooting with the X100 series since it came out. So that's my only camera. And so once you know your focal length, you become much faster at grabbing the shot and keep on going. You don't even have to stop. I mean, obviously, I don't bring the camera to my lens anymore since since I've been shooting with that camera. However, I used to shoot my last DSLR with a 5D Mark II. You can't hide with such a big camera, and I always brought it to my eye. Now we have tools that that allow us to work faster, more discreetly. The first thing I do when I get my camera is I remove the sound, and so there's no shutter sound at all, and so I can get closer. I used to get that close with a bigger, louder camera, but now we can do it without the sound and without having to bring the camera to our eye. And so working with a focal length that's consistent, you also learn to shoot blind. I don't always have to even look at the LCD to get my shot, because I know exactly where I need to be to get the shot I want without having to crop in post-processing. I mean, you tweak a little bit, of course, in post, but the goal is to get the shot in camera. At least that's my goal. I'm very much of a purist, and I think that's being a purist and setting limitations that you grow as a photographer anyways. I truly believe that whatever you do in post-processing is not going to make you a better photographer. But that would be an entire different conversation.
And I'm sure we'll get there. The setting limitations thing is actually super interesting, because that's really, that's part of a conversation I had with Karen Hutton only in last week's episode.
No. Good friend of
actually,
mine.
2 weeks ago, I think it would have been here. And we were talking about setting yourselves limitations in order to grow as a photographer. And having a fixed lens is definitely a great way to start. Because, when I first got into street photography, or I first became interested in it, I think what most people would do, I took my DSLR at the time with a zoom lens, and I went down into London, it's just where I live. And of course, I could keep the distance. I could zoom in and I could photograph people from a distance, which gave me maybe a little bit more confidence,
Mm-hmm.
But it didn't take long until, I met people who are really talented street photographers, and they either shoot with like fixed lens or twin lens reflex film cameras, or fixed lens cameras. I'm thinking, wow, that's a whole different ball game. So how do you shoot like from the hip so it's less conspicuous, or how do you approach that?
No, it depends what the scene is going to require. Sometimes I have to get a really high vantage point. Sometimes I have to get really low. And sometimes I'm just, the camera isn't right below my face. So it just all depends what I want to say with that photograph and what the best angle is going to be. I'm just going to go for it. I think, and you won't get the same feel if you shoot with a long lens, for example. I mean, street photography is something that the viewer has to feel like they're part of the scene. And if you shoot with a 200, you're not going to get that look. And so, and it's a completely different type of photography. You have to be close. I mean, but then even if you shoot with that lens, the way I work, and I can get really close to people. Some days I'm more minimalist, and I shoot silhouette kind of far away. It all depends on my mood. And the light too will play a great part. I never have a plan when I go out with my camera. I'm just going to let the street surprise me. I'm going to let the light do its thing, and then my mood. My mood is such a huge part. I can, what I call the emotional metadata that's in every picture. 10 years later, you remember exactly how you were feeling in that moment when you look at the picture, because it has that emotional imprint in it. And I think that's the beauty of photography. You really, it reflects reflects your personality 100%, especially on the streets. And there's something so special about capturing a moment that's never happened and will never happen again, that even you could not replicate, that no one else has, and no one ever will. The whole candid aspect of it is so precious, and I think now that so many people are finding shortcuts in photography, because, especially in street photography, because it is so difficult, and people don't realize how difficult it is. And it's not going to happen overnight. You really have to spend the time shooting day after day, and not set your expectations too high. You're not going to come home every day with a keeper. No. If you do, with the bar is probably still pretty low, which is okay. When you start, you have more keepers, and when you've been doing this for a while, you shoot less, and you're a little more difficult with yourself too. So you set your expectations much higher, and that's why it's so beautiful. That's why we never stop growing. That's why I always, when people say master of something, I don't like that term, because if you master it, then there is nothing left to learn. And if I didn't, if I felt like I had nothing left to learn, I would quit, because then what's the point? And so every day is better than the last, and you see something new, and it's just so exciting. I love street photography more and more every day. If I didn't, I wouldn't be doing it.
That's actually something I've learned. Really just by doing it myself, that really, just like anything else, if you want to get good at something, you're going to have to go practice it. That's the same thing. And of course, your keeper rate will dramatically increase the better you get at it. And this is really the same. In actual fact, that's the same in just about any genre of photography. I'm a portrait photographer really by trade, but I also know that, when I do a photo shoot with a headshot client, for example, if I compare what I do now to what I used to do 10 years ago, it's very different. Now I have a lot more keepers than I had 10 years ago, but that comes with experience. And this was always, the thing that really surprised me, talking to people who do street photography really as their main thing, is to realize how consistent you really have to be to go out, and that really means, you can only really be consistent if you love doing it, ultimately.
Oh yes, and you're right about the keeper. I think your rate of keeper is higher in the comparison to the number of shots you take, because you're only going to click the shutter on a pretty sure shot. Whereas when you start, you click, 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 and you hope for the lucky shot, right? So, and then when you start, you are, I think when you start, you're easier on yourself, and so you're excited about everything you photograph. Whereas when you've been doing this for a while, you're going to shoot a lot less. And again, that's part of the limitation. Only press the shutter if it's worth it. And I always tell my students, good enough should never be part of your vocabulary. If you're waiting for someone to walk through a beautiful shaft of light that's disappearing, it's not because it's disappearing that you need to settle. Don't take the shot if the subject is not up to standard. And not everyone will make a good street subject. So always envision what would make the strongest shot, and only press the shutter if this happens. I'm more of a reaction photographer, where I rarely stop and do the fisherman approach. I'm more a hunter. I keep walking, and I grab shots, and I keep moving. And I like that challenge of the grab shot. I find great satisfaction about getting a really strong grab shot. That's part of my personality. But so yes, limitations are important, but at first you can't limit yourself. You really need to shoot a lot to find your style, to find your voice, and it's really with going out a lot. I mean, looking at work is fine, but I think people then try to shoot for likes, and I think that's such a wrong approach. But I think every photographer starts there, and that's a product of social media. They want that confidence, they want the likes. The day you really grow is when you stop shooting for other people, is when you shoot just to make yourself happy. Because when it comes down to it, if you're a street photographer, you're doing it for you, right? You have no one to please but yourself. And that's such a gift, really such a gift. You don't shoot for clients, you just shoot for you. So having only one person to please, and that person being you, then who cares about the likes? Of course, we all very fragile artists. We all need a little boost once in a while. But you'll feel so much happier once you feel good about showing something that you know is not going to get as many. I know exactly what will get the likes and what won't. And usually the pictures that will get the most likes are not my favorite pictures. They're not the pictures that have the most merit either. And the ones that really have the most merit are the ones that matter the most to me. The one that I know that was a shot of a lifetime. I know the odds of me being there and seeing that moment and capturing that fraction of a second, being ready to react that quickly, made me so happy. And those are the shots that really matter. I can do, I can spend time in a beautiful setting and wait for the perfect silhouette to walk by. There is not as much merit in that. As long as you have time, it's going to happen. And as long as you set a certain standard, wait for really the most spectacular person to come through. If you have the time, yeah, just be patient. But I love when preparation, vision, and serendipity come into play in really that fraction of a second. And I have a few of my pictures over the past 12 years that I've been doing this seriously that stand out to me, but they're not necessarily the pictures that the most like. So anyways, I'm rambling, but I think it's so important to do this for yourself. And that's when you'll find your true voice. If you shoot for likes, that means you're trying to emulate other people's voice and style. And yes, you'll learn, but you should really, really follow your heart. And that's what I do in everything is really follow my heart. I don't care if people don't like it. And I often find that when I do reviews, whether it's online or during my workshops, and a photographer will select 10 photographs, for example, and then I'll glance at one that they haven't selected. I'm like, wait, let's look at this. Why didn't you want to show me this one? Oh, it's blurry. I'm like, but it has so much soul and it's so beautiful. And I said, that is the shot. And because it didn't follow the rules that they learned, which, I mean, you have to let go of all those rules that you learn if you want to be happy as a street photographer, because out of focus is beautiful. Motion blur is beautiful. Blown out can be beautiful. So photographers that get into street photography who have been practicing other genres, such as landscape, where they can take their time and they have not a tripod, they get really frustrated. And then they have a hard time letting go of the perfection. And I've seen my fair share of technically perfectly boring pictures, whereas the technical imperfection, when it's done with intent, is so much more meaningful and has so much more character and soul. It's all about an emotion. All it is, when it comes down to it, it's an emotion. So, and really, it's the photographer's emotion that matters. Other people may react to it the same way. Others won't, but that doesn't matter. It's really about you as a photographer.
You know what I've always found really interesting about street photography is that it's, like you said, it's a pretty chaotic environment that you have no control over. Like me, coming from a portrait photography background, I'm used to controlling things. I'm used to controlling the light. I'm used to controlling the subject, the posing, the camera settings. I'm used to controlling every little thing. But what I find so fascinating about street photography is that I literally have to let go of all of that. And
exactly.
And that requires a completely different skill set as a photographer. You have to learn to see things differently. This is the thing I think I sort of admire the most when I look at your work, and is that it's seeing those moments. You really have to develop an eye for that. How do you, and then you have to deal with the technical difficulties, like purely, just on the technical side. For instance, focus is a huge thing. Like, how do you focus, on something that you're reacting to super quickly? How do you do that? Because I have my fair share of out of focus images. Hey, let me just jump in real quick to tell you about the amazing sponsor of this episode, Platypod. Platypod offers innovative camera support systems designed to unleash your creativity. With their stable, versatile, and portable solutions, you can capture stunning shots like never before. And I'm not just saying that. As the host of the Camera Shake podcast, I can personally vouch for Platypod's incredible products. They've become an integral part of the show. In fact, I'm surrounded by various Platypod products holding up lights, cameras, microphones, and so on. It's really helped to transform the way I make the show and the way I shoot at home, in the studio, and on location. But don't just take my word for it. Explore Platypod's website at www.platypod.com to discover their range of products, including the Platypod Extreme, Platyball tripod heads, and the brand new handle, of course. Make sure to follow Platypod on Instagram and Facebook at Platypod Tripods for exclusive updates, tips, and giveaways. By choosing Platypod, you're not only investing in your photography, but you're also supporting the Camera Shake Photography Podcast. Thanks again to Platypod, our amazing sponsor. Platypod, where innovation never sleeps.
You're right. You have control of your vision and your gear. You have no control about what's happening. So it's doing that dance, positioning yourself to get the strongest possible shot in such a short time. And of course, you don't think of all the aspects that are going to make or break the picture. It just comes naturally. It becomes the way you see. I mean, if you have to start thinking about vanishing line, yes, repeated patterns, beautiful. The shadow here, watch your own shadow. I mean, of course, it becomes the way you see. If you had to think of all that, rule of thirds, blah, blah, blah. If you had to think of all that, you would never press the shutter because the moment is already gone. So it becomes the way you see. It becomes completely intuitive. Compositional elements that will make or break the picture become completely intuitive. And then you rely on your gear. I'm very rarely in full manual. I get into full manual if I want to really control, like if I want to work with motion blur, that type of thing, or some really creative focusing. But otherwise, I'm on center focus and out of focus. Cameras are really, really good at focusing. They're really quick. And now we have face detection, which is so wonderful. I started using face detection just a year or two ago because on the new cameras, it's actually very, very good. And so I don't use it all the time because you have to be careful. The metering switches to face. If you would face detection, it's not something you want to use all day, but for some occasions where it saves the shot. And so, and then you're going to miss a lot, but that's okay. And that's another teaching thing when my students tell me, oh, I saw this beautiful moment, but I missed the shot. I'm like, no, wait a minute. You didn't get the picture, but you learned something. You saw something that most people don't see. And right there, that is such a huge part of the learning. So missing the shot is part of the game, but you saw it. You saw the potential. You knew there was something there. And that's gold. That's really gold. And so you can't have one without the other anyway. So
how much control in terms of exposure do you leave up to the camera? Do you shoot in something like aperture priority mode, or how do you approach that?
Yeah, so I'm usually in aperture priority. My most common aperture is 4. Actually, I was just working on a presentation and I had to look at the metadata and I said, wow, I'm on f4 a lot. And then I only worry about the exposure compensation dial, pretty much. And I never look in a menu in a day. My camera is the dials are all there. And so I don't have to go into settings. I hate cameras that require going into menu during the day because you can't use that as a street photographer. It makes no sense. You need to be able.
That is the beautiful thing about the X series.
Exactly.
I mean, that's exactly why I first got involved in that. Yeah, absolutely.
Absolutely. So just the exposure compensation dial is really the dial that gets the most work out. If I'm in a situation where I want the subject to be silhouetted, well, I'll just stop it down and I don't even have to look at it. I do it without looking. It becomes very intuitive, and it's about quick reaction. So you have to have a camera that that works for you. It has to become an extension of your vision. And yes, I've been an ex-photographer for Fujifilm for 10 years. I could have any camera I want, and the only one I shoot with is this one. I don't care about other gear. I think trying different cameras and switching between cameras is totally counterintuitive and counterproductive in a way to your creativity. But a lot of people are in photography because of the camera. I could care less about the camera. This one works for me. Fine. I just need 2 of each one because I travel a lot and I teach. It's my tool. And if I drop one, I need to have a backup. So I always have a backup in my luggage, but I just need 2 of the same camera, period. I've been shooting with the X100 since it came out. I love it because I know it so well. And it hasn't changed either. So when I open a new one, it's no big deal to me. Like I would never do an unboxing. Like I don't care. I don't care what letter is on the camera as long as it works and it's reliable and it's familiar. So to me, the camera is like my best friend, and better not let me down. That one hasn't let me down. That's why I'm at the 6 right now, and I'm quite happy with the 6, much happier than I was with the 5. And so so far so good. Yeah.
I tell you a funny story. So I shot a concert the other day, and I had my youngest daughter with me as an assistant. Basically, she's 13, or she just turned 13. And so she was shooting with the Fuji X100F. And the funny thing was, we did the same gig about a month later, or 2 months later. And one of the organizers came up to me and said, "Oh, I just wanted to let you know that we used one of the images that your daughter shot on that small camera as the album cover for the live recording of last month's show." I was like, "Wow,
so cool.
that's very cool." And it looked great. One thing I want to ask you, especially to do with the Fuji X series cameras, and this will make very little sense to anybody who doesn't shoot Fuji, but if you're listening and you're shooting Canon or whatever, bear with me. Because the one thing I love about the Fuji cameras in general, but I find it particularly useful with the X series, is the fact that you can change your picture profiles. So for example, if one of the little assignments to myself is that I'm only going to be shooting black and white, what I can do is I can set up a black and white picture profile, and then I can basically go about and shoot that, and I can shoot directly to JPEG if I want to. How do you approach that? Do you always shoot in color and then convert that into black and white? Or how do you usually approach that?
It's another one of my limitations. I haven't shot a RAW file since I switched to that camera because I love the film simulation, and I made my own little recipes, but I make the decision of color in black and white. I truly believe that's part of the creative process, and that's part of a decision you make before you press the shutter. However, most photographers are really nervous about shooting without a safety net. And so, and that's fine. However, if you're shooting RAW or RAW plus JPEG, and you'll realize if you start shooting RAW plus JPEG and you really apply those creative limitations, you will soon just drop the RAW. I mean, who needs RAW in street photography? No one. I mean, I don't clone, I don't change anything, I don't remove things, doesn't matter. So even if you shoot RAW, you should always know, is this a color story? Is this a black and white story? Because it's a whole different thing. And no picture is going to be as strong in one or the other. So you should really know, is the color really the story? Is it part of the story, or is it distracting from what you want to say? Is it distracting from the emotion? So those are all creative decisions that you need to make before you press the shutter, even if you have the choice later. I shoot more black and white than color, but I do shoot color when it is a color story. But a lot of people shoot one or the other, so that's easy. You're just making the decision and when you head out. But for me, it's life that's going to make the decision. What I see that's going to make the decision, and so I switch accordingly. But if I have a black and white shot, it's never going to become a color one. So
it's giving yourself these limitations. Again, as we mentioned before, it's a super useful thing to allow you to grow as a photographer. One of the things I did only a little while ago was a friend of mine and I went into Chinatown in London. It was a summer day. It was blue skies. And we thought, okay, we're going to shoot film on like really old cameras. And we're going to use color film. We're going to shoot one roll of color film each in Chinatown. And the idea was really to really catch that color contrast, the red lanterns and the gold and the blue skies and that sort of thing. And it was hard. It was really difficult. It's unbelievably difficult, for two reasons. One, even if you only have like 10 shots on your roll of film, if you're shooting medium format, that takes all afternoon, as I've noticed. But the other thing is, it's so different. It's so difficult to react quick or fast, with those kind of cameras. I remember there was a rickshaw coming my way. I'm thinking, like, this is an amazing image. By the time I had manually focused that thing, that rickshaw was long gone. That's very, very difficult.
Then you realize how much more difficult it was to shoot in those days. Again, we have amazing tools now that really work in our favor. We can work so much faster, but the fact that we can work faster doesn't mean that we need to spray and pray either, which a lot of photographers do. And of course, you're going to get lucky shots, but what's going to make you a good photographer is when you have consistency in your work. And that consistency should show where your work keeps improving consistently and you have strong work. If you only have one strong image every year and a lot of mediocre ones, then you're not really growing. This might have been a lucky shot, and everyone will get lucky shots. That's fine. But so setting limitation, not overshooting, really shooting with intent. It's not because it's something that happens quickly that you need to work fast either. There are moments that I know I won't get, but I appreciate them nonetheless. You have to, I think, if you're only going to be happy as a street photographer is if you can actually go all day, enjoy the beauty of everyday life, and go home empty, just the same. And if you have a keeper and a good one at the end of the day, that's all you need. That really is all that should make you super happy. And that's the realistic, that's actually pretty realistic. If you have one good picture in a full day on the street, that's pretty good. But you should be happy if you don't. The experience itself should make you happy. And I think because a lot of people find it so tedious and so time consuming and the lack of control, that they start finding shortcuts or asking a friend to walk down this beautiful alley and, oh, you'll make a great silhouette. Here, done, in the can. Well, then what's the point, right? It makes no sense. Not only it's deceiving to the viewer, it's borderline unethical, because I really feel like street photography is very similar to photojournalism in that respect. And then what's the point for yourself? You didn't learn anything. Well, you may have learned how to handle a technique, fine. But you robbed yourself of the one thing that should give you the most satisfaction, is the merit behind the photograph, which is capturing that moment in the life of a stranger that was the decisive moment, and you got it in that fraction of a second. And it's a stranger, and it's 100% candid. That's the game. That's the game. I know that's difficult, but that's the beauty of it. So looking for shortcuts or cheating and posing strangers or asking them to do this or that, then probably nobody will ever know, but you know. And the only person, again, you need to satisfy is yourself. And knowing that, does that, that would, I don't know, that would make me feel awful. And I couldn't do it with a straight face. I could not put hashtag street photography on a portrait of somebody who is walking down the street that I know. It's just not, it's not what street photography is. And so, yes, it is difficult. Yes, you have to be happy with very few keepers at the end of the day, but that's part of the game. And I'm not sure if I even answered your question. I'm sorry.
Do you think?
You can tell I'm pretty passionate about this.
Do you think that the pressure of social media and this sort of self-imposed pressure of generating likes, do you think that is basically what makes people sort of stray from that kind of, let's say, more purist way of street photography?
Well, I think, first of all, street photography is not a very well understood genre of photography. It's not the thing it's not the genre of photography that's going to get a lot of likes or that people are going to buy. It's the name that's going to sell the work. It's not the photograph. I mean, of course, if it says, Berdoine or Henri Cartier-Bresson, could be the portrait of a stranger and everybody would want it, right? But who is going to buy a picture of a stranger from an unknown photographer? No one except their family, maybe, just to make them happy. So it's not very motivating when you think of it. You really can't sell it. You can't make a living with it. You really have to do it for yourself. It's kind of a lonely pursuit because you have, you don't do street photography with a group of friends. You do your best work when you're by yourself. And it's extremely difficult. So yeah, I guess if you're not up for the challenge, doesn't sound very appealing, honestly. And so a lot of people either try shortcuts just to get reaction on social media. I know we're going to be dealing with AI. And so that's frightening. And so, and it's that much more important today to stick to the true art of street photography. And to me, I will continue to teach it in its purest form, and people quickly get hooked once you start street photography and you realize how difficult it is, but you get the satisfaction of getting that decisive moment, and however rare that may be, you're completely hooked, and you'll never be bored a day in your life as long as you have your camera with you and there are people. And so I really hope that this trend of trying to get the perfect shot, who cares if it's something that I stage? No, I hope that doesn't continue because it's sad. And those people who do that will never know how good it feels to actually capture that moment that you have no control over. And that's so beautiful. Yeah.
The way I think about AI is I actually think AI, the emergence of AI really has some positive aspects to it, because hear me out on this, because I think just like in a lot of other areas of life, it's when the machines take over, when the sort of industrialization of a particular thing, whether that's making shoes or making whatever, when that sort of starts to take hold, then all of a sudden there is a particular, there's going to be like a particular sort of emphasis on the things that are still handmade. You can see, shoes is a good example. Handmade shoes are incredibly expensive. 100 years ago, that was the norm. Every shoe was handmade because there weren't any factories making them. But nowadays it's a completely different thing. So I always think like in photography, it's sort of a similar thing. Where you can really, you can sense the artistry when it's really the artist and the tool rather than the artist, the camera, and a boatload of processing or whatever else in between, which then sort of, gets to the point where anybody can do. I mean, just type in some prompts.
Yeah, and it's not photography. I mean, let's face it, AI is never going to be photography. And so right now it looks very fake, but it's going to get better and better. And they're stealing our images every day to make it better. And so it's a scary time for art. And it's another art form, but it's definitely by no means photography. And it's not going to teach anyone anything about being a good visual artist. And so it's interesting. I choose to completely ignore it. I'm never going to follow a photographer that has AI artist on their profile, because I am absolutely not interested in this new art form. It's not. I'm only interested in photography, and AI is not photography. And so, and I find it actually sad to see AI as part of some. I jury a lot of competitions, and I will never jury a competition that includes AI in a photography competition. I think that's appalling, and it is something completely different. And so, as long as we make that we draw the line, but unfortunately, we don't, and it's kind of sad. So yeah, but I find it unfortunate. I mean, no matter what shortcuts people try to find to make good work, it's only at their disservice. Oh, I don't know how you can say that. They only robbing in themselves of the pure pleasure of capturing something really meaningful in the moment. So, it's too bad for them. I don't care.
A little while ago, you wrote a book that basically dealt with setting yourself assignments in street photography. Tell me a little bit about that and what the importance is of focusing your mind on particular assignments when you go out, especially when you're first getting into street photography.
Well, I wrote that book, and actually it came out right during COVID 2020, but it still made, the Amazon bestseller. I was pretty happy, but it came at a really bad time when no one was on the streets. So over the years, I've heard so many people say, oh yeah, but I don't really feel like going out, or I don't know what to do. And so I was so tired of hearing that consistently. So you should not need an assignment to go out. But if that helps you, I came up with 75 assignments that people can take and do, and at least they have a purpose. They have a goal. They can go outside and they're going to practice motion. They're going to practice silhouettes, whatever it is. And so I wrote that book, and then I'm doing a 5-month masterclass of monthly assignments as well. Actually, it's 6 months. And so where I give my students an assignment, and then they come back after 4 weeks, and then we do a review of the work. And that's been hugely popular, and I'm really blown away at how much they've been learning, because a lot of those students who take this online class also come on my workshops, and I see how working and focusing on one technique has really helped them. And so it's good. Some people need a little boost. Some people need an assignment to get out. And so if you do, work on a project, worked on a series or something, it gets you out the door. And that's the goal, is to get you out the door and not, scrolling on Instagram and looking at other people's work.
Well, that's the thing. I mean, I can't even tell you how frustrated I get when I see people spending all of the time just scrolling mindlessly through Instagram.
Yeah.
Hour after hour after hour, where do you really think, well, you just get out there, just grab your camera and just get out there?
There is a cure for that. Your app can disappear in 15 minutes if you set it to that. I set mine at 20 minutes, and it's been really helpful because that's what the app is. That's why our phones are designed, to get us addicted. And so there are so many tools you can do to have your app deactivate after 20 minutes. I mean, you can reactivate it if you're in the middle of something, obviously, because sometimes I post some pretty big post or do stories, but normally I don't reach my limit now. So I miss a lot of stuff, but it's okay. It's for my mental health.
I didn't know that. Do you do that in the app or in the phone
You can
itself?
do it. I think you can do. I think it's in your phone. I can't remember now
Okay.
how I set it up, but I think you have that option in Instagram as well. Yeah.
Oh, okay. Well, that's an interesting thing. I should suggest it to my various children.
Yeah.
Their addiction with mobile phones.
Yeah. It's a scary thing.
So what are the type of assignments that people could set for themselves?
Well, anything. And I constantly play with new techniques myself. I discovered ICM in street photography the past couple of years, and it's been a lot of fun. Some people think it's a little gimmicky, but and a lot of people do intentional camera movement, like on forest and stuff, and it's so beautiful. When you apply that technique on a decisive moment, however, you're stepping up your game because everything else has to be right. The right subject, the right setting, the right background, whatever. The composition has to be good. And then you have to get that right movement to create really an emotional, beautiful, it's visual poetry. And I love it. So, and that's a good technique to use when you revisit places that you've been to a million times. Like, a couple of years ago, that's when I started doing ICM. I think it was at the Eiffel Tower because we were there in July, and it was a family trip. I'm like, no, I really don't want to go there. And so it was so packed with people. It was awful. And then I said, okay, I'll stand here for 5 minutes. I'm just going to play with ICM. And actually, I got a really fun picture of the Eiffel Tower in motion, in camera movement with people. There's actually a bride and groom walking towards it. And it ended up being one of my favorite pictures of the Eiffel Tower. So I think there's some techniques that you can apply to places that you've been to so many times that you kind of bored with them, or they're too touristy, or and become overdone, and then led to a project that I did, for example, an entire winter. And I live in a place where we have up to 6 months of snow here in Minnesota, and so I applied that ICM technique with the ND filter on my camera, obviously, because you can't do that in the snow without the ND filter. Intentional camera movement of snow scenes, but with people in them, like someone walking the dog, somebody's cross-country skiing, all in camera movement. And that was super fun because there's times where you need an assignment to get out when it's 20 below zero, and you still need, and there's not a whole lot of people on the streets, and so you need to give yourself assignments. So that's fine. Or working on series. I always have so many series. Some are becoming books, but not. Some are still in progress. Having series are wonderful. I'm working on the Stories of Hands. It's going to become, stop working on it. I've been working on that series for a few years now, and it's going to be published in France in the next few weeks as a fine art book. And it's all close-ups of hands of strangers that I've captured around the world in the past few years. So it's nice when you know the project is done and you can move on to another one. Sometimes they never get done. It's a kind of work in progress, but you kind of know when you've reached okay, I think I have enough now. I have 250 photographs, good photographs of strangers' hands. I think I'm done with that. And so it's fun. Whatever gets you out there, really. Or if you're out and you're kind of lost, like you're wandering aimlessly, and like, I don't. And I see that on workshops. Sometimes it's very overwhelming. We end up, somebody coming from Australia, and they're in Rome with me, and they're a bit overwhelmed because everything is so new and beautiful. I said, well, you gotta have to focus yourself on something, because otherwise you can get random shots of random things, and they're not gonna tie together. And so then I usually get them on track with one assignment, and then the visual, how do you call that? The creative juices start flowing, and then they get in the zone, and so they work on that little series or project or assignment, and then they start seeing other things, and then they're on the right track again. So sometimes you need that little boost. Yeah.
As you mentioned workshops, where can people find out about your workshops?
It's all on my website, valeriejardinphotography.com or valeriejardin.com, VALERIEJARDIN.com. And right now, the 2025 workshops are filling up. I'll be in London in October, actually.
Oh, fantastic. Let me know when you're here.
2025. Yeah, the workshop is already on the schedule. So,
amazing.
Yeah.
Of course, all the links to your website and to your Instagram kind of thing will be in the description of the YouTube video if you're watching this on YouTube, or in the description of the podcast. So wherever you're listening to this podcast, whether it's on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever, just check out the links in the description, of course. And by the way, the one thing I found super interesting and really, really, really lovely about your website also is how you structure your portfolio into these different projects. It's really it's actually really educational just to look through those different different projects, rather than just looking at sort of a massive like Instagram feed of random images. It's really nice to actually see the intent that you mentioned earlier, behind those images and how they sit together as a collection. Was really really fantastic to see.
So thank you.
So anybody, if anybody want to get any more a deeper insight into Valerie's photography, then make sure you check out her website again. All the links are in the description.
And I have two free downloads as well in the bookstore. So about street photography. So people can check those out.
Valerie, if there was one tip you would give to somebody who is thinking about getting into photography, or somebody who's just started and isn't that confident, what would be that one magic tip?
Really go out there and follow your heart. Do what feels right to you, and don't try to emulate or copy somebody else's style. Just follow your heart, and then you'll find your own vision, your own voice as a photographer. Get inspiration, and chances are you will like someone's work and you will gravitate toward that style. But try to really follow your heart. Don't try to do things you feel uncomfortable doing, even if somebody tells you got to get like 10 rejections in the next hour. No, that is not a way I would approach this, because all that's going to do is going to make you want to stop. And so it's supposed to be fun and enjoyable. So go out there and do what feels right to you. Don't try to make anybody else happy.
Fantastic. And Valerie, I know you have another call to get onto, so thank you so much for your time today and for being our guest on the Camera Shake podcast this week.
Thank you for having me.
Okay, folks, that is it for today. It was fantastic having Valerie on the show. And as always, before we go, let me just recommend another episode that I think you'll like. Check out episode 227 with Karen Hutton. I'm sure you love it. We talk about creativity throughout the whole episode. It's absolutely amazing. If you enjoy our content, though, consider supporting us on buymeacoffee.com/camerashake to help us continue creating and bring you more exciting episodes. It really does mean the world to us. And for those of you who are listening to the audio version of this podcast, did you know that there's a fully fledged video version over on YouTube with plenty of examples of our guest photography in full Technicolor or black and white, depending on what it is? All you have to do is go over to YouTube, search for Camera Shake Podcast, and you'll be able to watch all past episodes on there. And if you're already on YouTube, well, just drop us a comment, hit the like button, ring that bell, and share with your friends. Your engagement helps us reach a wider audience all over the world. So thank you for listening and watching. And remember, a new episode drops every Thursday. So make sure you mark that in your calendars, diaries, whatever it is that you use. Until next time, keep shaking things up in the world of photography. See you next Thursday.